Hi, this is Jeff,
And this is Marcy,
and we are serving up grades the SBG way.
a farm-to-table process.
Folks, let's imagine it's November 6, 2015, here in Deerfield, and we've unveiled the new SBG report cards. Let's take a look at a student in one of our schools who has Mr. Chomsky for world language, in this case Spanish. And the student's name is Mikey Mouse, and on November 6, he carries home his report card with all of his grades, including Spanish. And for Spanish, he received 4 grades. These are still grades, they're marks, they're scores, showing how well a student is doing. And let's take a look at those by strand. What did he get?
So Mikey Mouse got a 4 in listening, and he got a 3 in speaking, reading, and writing.
And if you look over on the right-hand side, although we won't talk about it much in this video, he looks to be a very strong student in the areas of habits of success. The teacher has marked him with 4s across the board in those important areas as well. But note again that that does not reflect on how he's doing academically to standards. But again, as Marcy said, those were his academic scores. What exactly do those align to, first of all? First, it's important to remind ourselves what those 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s actually mean. Mikey received a 4 in the area of listening for Spanish. What does a 4 mean? A 4 means that Mikey is actually exceeding standards. That means that the teacher thinks that on November 6, 2015, Mikey's actually doing better in the area of listening than he would have expected a typical student to be at that point in time.
Right. And Mikey earned 3s in reading, writing, and speaking, and that's right where the teacher would expect the student to be at that given point in time.
So a 3 indicates that Mikey is meeting standards, which is right where he should be. Okay, so now that we know what Mikey's grades were for the first quarter on November 6th of 2015, let's work backwards to see how we got to those grades. The World Language Team in the spring of 2015 identified 4 of the most important strands relating to their subject. A report card is only a report card, and even though the new report cards will convey more information, it is still only going to convey limited information. So the world language teachers met and said the 4 most important strands to report on are listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which frankly makes a great deal of sense to me. The next thing they have to do is identify standards that align with those strands. Now, world language teachers, my apologies. For the purposes of this video, I just pulled some standards. These may or may not be ones that you actually teach to. I did some research, and for the purposes of this video only, I wanted to put 3 statements below each of the 4 strands. So these are for demonstration purposes only, but every department has to start with their strands that will be on the report card, whether you have 3, 4, 5, or maybe even 6, and then the next charge for every teacher in the district and every team in the district is to identify the standards that align to each strand. So in this case, for today's demonstration only, we came up with 3 standards that could possibly align with each of those strands.
All right, so we're going to go back to the report card, and we're going to break it down to help our viewers see how the teacher came upon the score for each of the individual strands. So let's start off by taking a look at listening and see how that teacher came upon the score of a 4 for listening.
The teacher was entering the last week of the reporting period for the first quarter, and for listening, he had already recorded a number of grades in the grade book on several of the listening standards that apply to the listening strand. At this point, most importantly, Mr. Chomsky had a really good idea of what type of student Mikey was in the area of listening. His only question at this point was a lot of the assessments and the evidence in the grade book and his observations of Mikey. He knew that he was somewhere between a 3 and a 4. He knew that he was a strong student who was at least meeting standards, and many of the grades in the grade book were 3s, but he also had many 4s, and there seemed to be an upward trend in the more recent evidences that the 4s were the predominant score. But he had one last assessment to include that aligned with the listening standard and the listening strand.
So for the sake of our demonstration, we'll consider this as our final piece of evidence in that listening strand, focusing on one of those listening standards, of course. And we'll assume that Mikey did quite well and that he would have exceeded standards on this, that the student was able to understand spoken language consistently. So the teacher would take that final piece, enter it as a 4, and then consider that last strand and mark Mikey as a 4, showing that he has exceeded standards in listening.
So again, over the course of the quarter, the teacher looked at all of the evidence, and Mr. Chomsky determined, based on not just that final piece of evidence, but that would combine with all the others, aligning to these standards, that Mikey was actually exceeding where he would have expected a student to be at that grade level. Now let's go back to the report card, and therefore he put a 4 on the report card for the first 9 weeks.
So as we know, the next strand that the teacher would be reporting on would be the area of speaking in world language. And we're going to assume, for the sake of this demonstration, that Mikey struggled a little bit in speaking earlier in the year, and that throughout all the pieces of evidence that the teacher was collecting, he was earning many 2s. But throughout the course of the quarter, as his skills progressed, he started to earn some 3s. So if this were the final piece of evidence for the strand of speaking, and Mikey earned a 3, showing that he was actually meeting those standards, then as the teacher goes back to report out on the speaking strand, he would mark Mikey as a 3, showing that he is actually meeting the speaking standards for this point of the school year.
So going back to the standards, based on all the evidence that the teacher recorded that aligned with those speaking standards for that large strand, the teacher determined. So now we've looked at listening and speaking and how the evidence and grades we've recorded from the standards that align to those 2 strands have informed what we put down on the report card. Obviously, folks, we wouldn't be teaching these one at a time. It would all be integrated, and we'd just be separating out the grades we take to align with those strands, but we're taking it piece by piece here today. So let's look again at the report card, and now we've shown how we got to a 4 on listening in the area of Spanish, and how we arrived at a score of 3 for speaking in the area of Spanish. Now let's move to the area of reading. We're approaching the end of the grading period. As you know, it's almost November 6th when report cards are posted, and in the area of reading, Mikey has been really consistent. All year long, Mikey's grades that we've collected that align to the reading standards and therefore the reading strand have been right at where we would expect a typical student to be who's progressing on grade level. So almost all of the evidence we've recorded in the grade book at this point, Mr. Chomsky has reported as a 3, meeting standards, and the one last assignment for the quarter, this reading assessment right here, is one final piece of evidence he'll collect. His guess is that Mikey will still receive a 3 on the report card, even if he were to receive a 2 on this particular piece of evidence, but he certainly wants to administer this assessment, take everything into account, and when he does, he finds that Mikey gets a 3 on this assessment and therefore has a 3.
So once again, we're focusing on the reading strand, and you'll notice that there are 3 standards within that strand. The teacher's been collecting evidence on all of those standards and arrived to the final grade in the reading strand of a 3. So we're coming back to that report card one more time. We've seen that 3, and now we're moving on to the writing strand, and the teacher gives Mikey Mouse the grade of a 3 in writing. How does he get there?
So finally, let's take a look at the writing strand. Mikey, just like with reading, has been ridiculously consistent all quarter long, and every piece of evidence Mr. Chomsky has collected has pretty much been a 3. There was 1, 2 early on and a 4 in between there too, but he's been very consistent, a 3, a meeting standards kind of a student in the area of writing as it applies to Spanish. So of course he wants to administer one last assessment, and this is a pretty comprehensive writing assessment that we're going to score to a rubric here, 4, 3, 2, or 1. Now, something surprising happens here. What happens, Marcy?
So, Mikey was off his game. And
He was off his game?
He was off his game. He wasn't performing
What's
where he
Mr.
typically
Chomsky going
does.
to do?
I don't know. Well, ultimately what he does is he grades the assessment, and it turns out that on this particular assessment, Mikey ends up earning a 2. So all along he's been earning mostly 3s, maybe an occasional 2, but on this final assessment that's going to be that last data point, the teacher finds that he earns a 2. So he has to use his professional judgment at this point. He has to take a look at everything he's learned about that student, and even though he did earn a 2 on this one assessment, overwhelmingly it's been 3s all along. So I think that what he'll end up doing is giving Mikey the score of a 3, because when you look at all those standards together, really, Mikey has shown it, for the most part, he's been meeting standards in writing.
And that's so important. It does get back to, it's not averaging grades, it's not looking only at the numbers on any one given assignment. It's looking at all evidence, and then finally, most importantly, more important than anything, using your human professional judgment to communicate to Mikey and his parents where you think he is at that point in time toward the standard. And he may even, depending on the time of the quarter or time of year, offer a redo to let Mikey bring that up. So we've hit the fourth and final strand, the writing strand. Again, the writing strand is informed by 3 standards. We've just made those up, pulling those from the web. But I just wanted to show you what it would look like in any subject. You have your strands. You have your standards that align to those strands to come up with the grades. So there you have Mikey's report card in the area of world language, which for him is Spanish, and his teacher is Mr. Chomsky. One last thing to point out as a reminder to everybody, the teacher comments. In every subject that Mikey takes, he'll bring home some teacher comments. Each one of these areas for each quarter will begin with a sentence or two simply saying what was taught and learned that quarter. And this would be the same whether Mikey had Mr. Chomsky, or he had Miss Cohen, or he had Mrs. Feldberg. That's just telling what was taught and learned that 9 weeks. Then there will be a personalized comment showing maybe a strength of what Mikey has done and some area he can improve on. In this case, Mikey has excelled with his listening skills and shown consistent growth with interpretation of the target language. He can improve his output skills, writing and speaking, by doing some additional practice and submitting it for feedback. So Marcy and I hope you have enjoyed our little production of standards-based grading, a farm-to-table approach to grading and reporting. The analogy is apt in one way because it's we're trying to show you the beginning to the end product.
And it's also very much like a farm-to-table restaurant experience. In farm-to-table, your food goes from the farm straight to the table without any additives or preservatives. It's real, it's natural, and it's organic. And that's what we hope to show you through the standards-based grading approach to reporting grades. It's that it's very natural. It's that you, the teacher, aren't adding or altering the grade in any way. You're just reporting out naturally what the student has shown throughout your class.
And finally, we hope that Mrs. Neustadt and Mr. Burzak will take a look at this artwork and score it to standards in the area of art. Folks, if you feel that it meets or exceeds expectations, please know that I am responsible for this artwork. If you feel that it falls in the 1 or 2 range, we're going to blame this masterpiece on Marcy Faust. Thanks for watching this. Please let us know if you have any questions at all on this, and we'll try to help along the way.
Thanks.